Greetings, I'm back. I took a short hiatus, but now I guess I'm starting book 2. So the major subtext in this part is perhaps it's not the second book, but it's just the major subtext is Jesus' teaching mission in the country of northern Galilee and on the banks of the Jordan. The minor subtext is the messengers of the centurion of Capernaum. Now, in the calendar, we are August the 3rd, which is a Thursday, AD 30, that's 30 AD, and it's the month of Ab the 15th. So right after the full moon. All right. From Nain, Jesus, leaving Nazareth on the left, journeyed past Tabor to Cana, where he put up near the synagogue with a doctor of the law. The forecourt of the house was soon full of people who had anticipated his coming from Enganim and were here awaiting him. He had been teaching the whole morning when a servant of the centurion of Capernaum, with several companions mounted on mules, arrived. He was in a great hurry and wore an air of anxiety and solicitude. He vainly sought on all sides to press his way through the throng around Jesus, but could not succeed. After several fruitless attempts, he began to cry out lustily, "Venerable Master, let thy servant approach thee. I come as a messenger of my Lord of Capernaum. In his name, and as the father of his son, I implore thee to come with me at once, for my son is very sick and nigh unto death." Jesus appeared not to hear him, but encouraged at seeing that some were directing Jesus' attention to him, the man again sought to press through the crowd. But, not succeeding, he cried out anew, "Come with me at once, for my son is dying." When he cried so impatiently, Jesus turned his head toward him and said loud enough for the people to hear, "If you see not signs and wonders, you do not believe. I know your case well. You want to boast of a miracle and glory over the Pharisees, though you have the same need of being humbled as they. My mission is not to work miracles in order to further your designs. I stand in no need of your approbation. I shall reserve my miracles until it is my Father's will that I should perform them, and I shall perform them when my mission calls for it." And thus Jesus went on for a long time, humbling the man before all the people. He said that man had been waiting long for him to cure his son, that he might boast of it before the Pharisees. But miracles, Jesus continued, should not be desired in order to triumph over others, and he exhorted his hearers to believe and be converted. The man listened to Jesus' reproaches without being at all disturbed. Not at all diverted from his design, he again tried to approach nearer, crying out, "Of what use is all that, Master? My son is in the agony of death. Come with me at once. He may perhaps be already dead." Then Jesus said to him, "Go, thy son liveth." The man asked, "Is that really true?" Jesus answered, "Believe me, he has in this very hour been cured." Thereupon the man believed, and no longer importuning Jesus to accompany him, mounted his mule and hastened back to Capernaum. Jesus remarked that he had yielded this time. At another time, this is unfinished. It says at another time he, and it's an unfinished sentence, so I'll just move on. "I saw this man not as invested with the royal commission, but as himself the father of the sick boy. He was the chief officer of the centurion of Capernaum. The latter had no children, but had long desired to have one. He had consequently adopted as his own the son of his confidential servant and his wife. The boy was now 14 years old. The man came in quality of messenger, though he was himself the true father and almost indeed the master. I saw the whole affair. All the circumstances were clear to me, and it was perhaps on account of them that Jesus permitted the man to importune him so long. The details I have just given were not publicly known. The boy had long sighed after Jesus. The sickness was at first slight, and the desire for Jesus' presence arose from the feeling entertained against the Pharisees. But for the last 14 days, the case becoming aggravated, the boy had constantly said to his physicians, "All these medicines do me no good. Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth, alone can help me." When the danger had become imminent, messages had been dispatched to Samaria by means of the holy women, while Andrew and Nathanael had been sent to Enganim. And at last the father and steward himself rode to Cana, where he found Jesus. Jesus had delayed to grant his prayer in order to punish what was evil in his attentions. It was a day's journey from Cana to Capernaum, but the man rode with such speed that he reached home before night. A couple of hours from Capernaum, some of his servants met him and told him that the boy was cured. They had come after him to tell him that if he had not found Jesus, he should give himself no further trouble, for the boy had suddenly cured at the 7th hour. Then he repeated to them the words of Jesus. They were filled with astonishment and hurried home with him. I saw the centurion Zorobabel and the boy coming to the door to meet him. The boy embraced him. He repeated all that Jesus had said. The servants had accompanied him, confirming his words. There was a great joy, and I saw a feast made ready. The youth sat between his adopted father and his real father, the mother being nearby. He loved his real father as much as he did the supposed one, and the former exercised great authority in the house. After Jesus had dismissed the man of Capernaum, he cured several sick persons who had been brought into the court of the house. There were some possessed among them, though not of the vicious kind. The possessed were often brought to Jesus' instructions. At first sight of him, they fell into fruitful raging and threw themselves on the ground, but as soon as he commanded them to be at peace, they became quiet. After some time, however, they seemed no longer able to restrain themselves and began again to move convulsively. Jesus made them a sign with his hand, and they again recovered themselves. The instruction over, he commanded Satan to go out of them. They lay, as was usual on such occasions, for about 2 minutes as if unconscious, and then, coming to themselves, thanked Jesus joyfully, not exactly knowing what had happened to them. There are such good possessed people of whom the demon has taken possession by no fault of their own. I cannot clearly explain it, but I saw on this occasion, as well as upon others, how it happens that a guilty person may, by the mercy and long sufferance of God, be spared, while Satan takes possession of one of his weak, innocent relatives. It is as if the innocent took upon himself a part of the other's punishment. I cannot make it clear, but it is certain that we are all members of one body. It is as if a healthy member, in consequence of a secret intimate bond between them, suffers for another that is not sound. Such were the possessed of this place. The wicked are much more terrible, and they cooperate with Satan, but the others merely suffer the possession and are meanwhile very pious. Jesus afterward taught in the synagogue. There were present from Nazareth several doctors of the law, and they invited him to return with them. They said his native city was ringing with the great miracles he had wrought in Judea, Samaria, and Enganim. That he knew very well the opinion prevalent in Nazareth that whosoever had not studied in the school of the Pharisees could not know much. Therefore, they desired him to come and teach them better. They thought by these arguments to seduce Jesus, but he replied that he would not yet go to Nazareth, and that when he did, they would not obtain what they were now demanding. After the instruction in the synagogue, Jesus was present at a great feast in the house of the father of the bride of Cana. The bride and bridegroom with the widowed aunt of the latter were there. Nathanael the bridegroom had joined Jesus as a disciple on his coming to Cana, and had helped him keep order during the instruction and the curing of the sick. The bridegroom and bride dwelt alone. They carried on no housekeeping, for they received their meals from the parents of the latter. Her father limped a little. They were good people. Cana was a clean, beautiful city on a lofty plateau. Several highways ran through it, and one straight to Capernaum, about 7 hours' distance. The road inclined a little before reaching Capernaum. After the feast, Jesus returned to his abode and again healed several sick persons who were patiently awaiting him. He did not always cure in the same way. Sometimes it was by a word or command, and sometimes he laid his hands upon the sick. Again, he bowed himself over them. Again, he ordered them to bathe. And sometimes he mixed dust with his saliva and smeared their eyes with it. To some he gave admonitions, to others he declared their sins, and others again he sent away without being cured. I'm going to stop the reading here since the next part is Jesus in Capernaum and it's pretty long. So I just have two notes here. The first one is the first story most certainly was the end of John 4 with the royal official. He went out to have his boy cured, and he was cured at exactly that hour. So that's that. That's where we are, I guess, in his ministry. We're at the end of John 4, which means what's upcoming is the healing at Bethsaida, or the pool of Bethesda, or whatever it's called. The problem is like you have multiple versions of the Bible, and they call it like slightly different things. Anyways, so the more important note, Anne Catherine mentions that some people were suffering because of relatives that were doing evil, and so these people were suffering for them. Now, she explains what I heard exorcists already speaking about. This is the concept of the victim soul, which, as Catholics, you probably should have heard about it, but maybe not. I mean, I haven't heard. There's a lot of these terms I was foreign to until I was in my mid-30s. So, anyways, they're called victim souls. And in this particular case, she said it was a relative, but when Father Chad Ripperger, who is an exorcist, talks about exorcism, he mentions victim souls in passing, but he'll often say this when his sessions go on for a while with a particular case, he starts to get a sense that there's something God wants to communicate through the demon, which is why it is allowed to possess the victim soul or the soul in the first place. Often it's the case where it's just the person themselves asked to be possessed in some way, or they were playing with cursed objects or something. But he talks about victim souls, and apparently the Emily Rose story was one such case. I don't know if that was her real name. Anyways, many exorcists believe she should actually be canonized because how much she gave of herself. She basically was a martyr. So victim souls are people who struggle not because they themselves opened the portals to possession, but because they chose to take on the suffering for another. Mother Mariana de Jesus Torres of the Our Lady of the Good Events or Good Success apparitions sort of went through this process of being a victim soul. Now, if you do not know this seer, I would highly recommend. There's seminars given by a Dr. Marian Horvat. Look, look them up because it's a fantastic listen, and I think it's if you find like an hour or 45-minute video, listen to them because this Mother Mariana de Jesus Torres is one of the most fascinating people you'll ever hear about. Anyway, she sort of went through the process of being a victim soul, but not really with a possession. That is, she wasn't a victim soul in terms of being possessed, but in other ways. She rescued the soul of a woman named La Capitana, who was, I guess, another nun, but she was kind of wicked and had great difficulty with the faith. And when we look into these things, if you're a critical eye like me, you read in between the lines. These are battles, all right, but they're microcosms. That's the word they use when a smaller battle represents a much larger one. So in Mother Mariana's case, this La Capitana may be like the microcosm in the fight of Catholicism versus the people of North America. Right? And it would take a lot to convert this region, but it's possible if you suffer for them. So anyways, she suffered 5 years being isolated from God in order to rescue the soul of this wretched nun. And it's almost like it was a rehearsal for what's to come because she offered herself as a victim soul again to Christ. That is, she died and she was resurrected and she died 3 deaths. It was to mitigate the punishment that was due. Now, Christ said, I will punish heresy, I will punish blasphemy, I will punish impurity. Which we all know that our continents here in the West, they do this a lot. Impurity, blasphemy, and heresy, and we can thank Mother Mariana de Jesus Torres for the punishment, the chastisement due us, having been alleviated. Now, still on the subject, now every death obviously represented one of the punishments alleviated. Now, still on the subject of human or victim souls, I watched an interview once, this woman who is a convert. She said that there was a possessed person in Mexico, another victim. This was a victim soul, and the country had just effectively legalized abortion, and so the reason for the possession was transmitted to the exorcist. Now, this is not at all foreign to Catholic teaching for one to suffer for the sins of another out of love. In fact, we often suffer the faults of our parents as children and often suffer their generational curses. We inherit them so as to take on their sufferings ourselves as part of the penance. And Christ and Mary took on immense suffering for us despite them being blameless. It all just gives weight to God telling Adam and woman in Genesis 3, "What have you done?" Because this is what Catholicism is. It's offering sacrifices, offering suffering, martyrdom, carrying the cross. So technically, original sin, or this human predilection for error we all possess, the grand sickness, is a generational curse we inherited from Adam and woman. So that's it. Ave Maria.